It was 8:47 on a Friday night, and I was still in the bleachers at Harrison Park, 31 miles from home, when Hazel called. I almost didn't answer. My grandson had just come up to bat with a full count. I had a cup of coffee going cold in my left hand and my phone buzzing in my right, and for half a second I genuinely considered letting it go to voicemail. But Hazel never called late unless something was genuinely wrong. I answered. Martin. Her voice came through tight and high, the way it gets when a person is trying not to panic and not quite managing. I need you to listen carefully. There are lights on in your office, and I just watched a man carry a box out your back door. I didn't recognize him. He put it in the trunk of a car I've never seen before and drove away. Martin, I already called 911. I stood up from the bleachers without thinking. The coffee hit the ground. I don't remember my grandson's at-bat. I remember my son-in-law looking up at me from 2 rows down with a question on his face, and I remember saying, "Watch my seat," which was absurd, but that's what came out. My wife was home alone. It means everything that you're here. At Fallen Vengeance, every story we tell exists to remind us of what we nearly lost, and what it took to hold on. Before I go further, tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Your city, your state. I read every single one. And a note before we begin. This story contains some elements woven in for educational purposes, but the lesson at the center of it is one I have lived, and I would not trade the knowing of it for anything. Now let me tell you what happened that night. My name is Martin Tully. I am 66 years old. I spent 38 years running my own plumbing business in Columbus, Ohio. Nothing glamorous, nothing that makes the news. Just honest work. Getting up at 5 in the morning in January to drive to job sites in the dark. Teaching apprentices how to read a blueprint and thread pipe and do things right the first time. Because in my trade there is no such thing as close enough. A pipe that is close enough eventually fails. And when a pipe fails, it takes everything around it with it. I have been married to Clara for 38 years. She taught 2nd grade at Blendon Elementary for 26 of them. She makes her own jam. She keeps a vegetable garden in the backyard that feeds half the neighborhood, whether they ask to be fed or not. She is the most quietly capable woman I have ever met, and in 38 years of marriage, I have never once seen her flinch when I walked into a room. I need you to understand that, because of what I saw when I walked into Grant Medical Center at 10:22 that Friday night. She was sitting up in the hospital bed with a bandage on the back of her head and an IV running into her left arm. When I came through the door, she pulled back against the pillow, just slightly, just for a half second, before recognition moved across her face and the tension went out of her shoulders. But that half second happened. I watched it happen. 38 years, and my wife flinched when she saw me. I found out later that the detective had spoken with her before I arrived. The detective's name was Ruiz. He met me in the hospital parking lot, which told me he had been watching for my arrival. He was early 50s, compact build, gray jacket, notepad in one hand. He asked me where I had been that evening. I told him about the game, the park, the time I left the house, who had been in the car with me. Clara had stayed home because she had a headache and didn't want to sit in the cold. Ruiz wrote everything down. Then he looked up and said, "Mr. Tully, your son was present at the scene when officers arrived. He states that he came to check on your wife and found her on the floor of the home office. He also states that over the past several months, you have been experiencing significant behavioral changes and that your wife has expressed fear about your temper." I stood very still in that parking lot with the overhead lights, turning everything the color of old fluorescent tubing. My son had arrived before I did. My son had already talked to the police. My son had already described my temper. I thought about the last time we had spoken, 3 weeks earlier, a Sunday afternoon phone call. He had asked how my back was holding up. He had asked whether Clara and I had given any thought to what we were going to do with the house when things got too difficult to manage on your own. I had told him I wasn't planning to do anything with the house, that Clara and I were fine, that I'd see him at Thanksgiving. He laughed and said he was just being practical. That was the word he used, practical. I asked Ruiz to take me to see my wife. My son was standing near the hospital entrance when I got inside. He was wearing a navy fleece I recognized, and his expression was perfectly assembled, furrowed brow, red-rimmed eyes, shoulders caved inward in the posture of a worried child. He moved toward me when he saw me and said, "Dad," in a voice that broke exactly where a voice breaks when someone is genuinely devastated. I looked at my son, 39 years. I brought him home from Riverside Hospital in a car seat I had checked the installation on 3 times. I taught him to ride a bike in a parking lot 2 miles from where we were standing. I sat with him through broken bones and a terrible breakup, and the night his first business deal collapsed, and he called me at 2 in the morning not knowing what to do. I had always answered. Standing in that hospital lobby, I looked at my son's face, and I thought, he knew I was at the game. He knew Clara was alone. He had a car I didn't recognize waiting 2 houses down the street. I asked him why he had come to the house that evening. He said he had been worried about his mother, wanted to check in. I asked why he hadn't called first. He paused, just briefly, just long enough for me to notice, and said he didn't want to wake her if she was resting. I said, "What were you taking out the back door, son?" His jaw tightened. He said he didn't know what I was talking about. I didn't push it further. Not then. I said I needed to see Clara, and I walked past him down the corridor. She told me everything once we were alone, and the door was closed. He had arrived at 7:30 that evening. Said he was in the neighborhood, wanted to check in. She made him tea. They sat in the kitchen for 20 minutes, and then he said he needed to use the bathroom. 10 minutes later, she went to find him and found him in my office instead. The filing cabinet open, the folders at the back pulled out. The ones I keep for the deed, the trust documents, the property records. She told him to stop. He told her she didn't understand, that he was trying to help, that she and I were too old to be managing everything on our own. She told him to leave. She moved toward the door to get her phone, and he put his hand on her arm to stop her. Not violently. She was clear about that. She said it was firm but not violent. But when she pulled away, she lost her footing. She caught the corner of the desk on the way down. He left before she could get up. That was when Hazel's cameras caught him at the back of the house, loading a bag into the trunk of a waiting car. Hazel has lived directly across the street for 12 years, since her husband passed. She is 70 years old and notices everything in the particular way that people who live alone develop. A genuine awareness of the rhythms of the street, which cars belong, which lights come on and when. 3 years ago, after a package theft 2 blocks over, she installed a security camera system that covers her front porch, the full width of the street, and both neighboring driveways. I went to see her the morning after Clara came home from the hospital. She had coffee ready and her laptop open on the kitchen table. I pulled everything from 6 p.m. forward, she said. Sit down. Timestamp 7:28 p.m. My son's car pulling into the driveway. Timestamp 8:31 p.m. My son coming around the side of the house with a canvas bag, moving to a second vehicle parked 2 houses down with the engine running. He transferred something from the bag to the trunk, got into the passenger seat, and the car pulled away. That car was parked there from 6:51, Hazel said quietly. Hour and 40 minutes before he came out. An hour and 40 minutes. He had not come by on impulse. He had arrived with a plan, a car waiting, a specific window of time calculated around my absence. Hazel told me she had already made 4 copies of the footage, 1 for me, 1 for her attorney, 1 in a fireproof box, and 1 emailed to herself at 2 separate addresses. I didn't sleep much last night, she said, but I stayed busy. I went home and called Chester. Chester and I have been friends since our kids were in middle school. He spent 30 years as a certified public accountant, specializing in financial fraud investigations. Not the kind of CPA who does your taxes in a strip mall office, but the kind who gets called in when a company suspects someone has been skimming and needs to know exactly how and for exactly how long. He retired 4 years ago, but his mind hasn't changed. He runs 3 monitors and a high-speed scanner out of a home office that makes mine look like a junk drawer. I brought him everything I had access to and told him to find what I wasn't seeing. By midnight, he had found the first thing. A home equity line of credit application, a HELOC, filed with Cornerstone Federal Bank in Columbus 4 months ago. The property listed as collateral. Our house on Alton Ridge Drive. The amount requested, $175,000, approved and disbursed. The signature on the application was mine. I had not signed it. Chester set it on the desk between us. That notarization is fraudulent, he said, because the date on the stamp is a Thursday, and you and I were at the Wayne County fishing weekend from that Thursday through Sunday. I remember because you complained about your back the whole drive home. I pressed both hands flat on the desk. $175,000. Drawn against the home Clara and I had paid off 11 years ago. Our savings in concrete form. The thing I had worked 38 years to own cleanly. Where did the money go? I asked. Chester turned his monitor to face me. He had been making calls for the past 2 hours. The $175,000 had been deposited into an account my son controlled, transferred within 48 hours to a business account for an LLC he had registered in Indiana 6 months ago. And from there, Chester paused here, and I could see him choosing how to say what came next. Moved to a private lending company in Indianapolis to pay down a debt my son had been carrying for 18 months. My son owed $290,000 to a private lender, not a bank. A private operation with compound interest terms that had more than doubled his original balance. The lender had sent a formal demand notice 3 months ago. The deadline for full repayment was 4 weeks away. He had used my house and my forged name to pay back a debt I didn't know existed. Before I tell you what I found next, something so calculated, so deliberate, that I had to stand up from the desk and walk to the window and just breathe for a while. Drop the number 66 in the comments right now. 1 for each year I've been carrying myself through this life. Let me know you're still with me. 4 days after my conversation with Chester, I received a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. A woman's voice. Careful, quiet. She said her name was Naomi, that she was my son's wife, and that she thought we needed to talk. I had met Naomi 4 times, twice at holidays, once at a family birthday lunch, once briefly at a neighborhood event. I had always attributed her quietness to shyness. Sitting across from me at a booth in a diner on Cleveland Avenue, she did not look shy. She looked like a person who had been carrying something much heavier than shyness for a very long time. She had found a folder on her husband's laptop 3 months ago while looking for a shared tax document. Inside were notes about property valuations in our neighborhood, email threads with a contact she didn't recognize, a spreadsheet with our address, and a column labeled projected net. And there was something else. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her jacket pocket, worn soft at the creases from being handled many times. She unfolded it and smoothed it on the table between us. A printed email. My son's name in the sender field, the name of a memory care facility in Dublin, Ohio in the address bar. The subject line read, Inquiry, Prospective Resident. The body of the email asked about intake procedures, room availability, visitation policies, and, I read this sentence 3 times before it fully landed, protocols for managing residents who may initially decline placement. Residents who may initially decline placement. My wife is 63 years old. She taught children to read for 26 years. She grows heirloom tomatoes and enters her strawberry preserves at the county fair, and has more intellectual energy than most people half her age. My son had written a formal inquiry about placing her in a memory care facility in Dublin, Ohio, while sitting at our Thanksgiving table eating her cooking. I set the paper down on the diner table and looked out the window at Cleveland Avenue and let myself sit inside that truth for a moment without running from it. Naomi said, I kept telling myself there was a different explanation. She looked at her hands. There isn't. I thanked her. I told her that whatever she had shared with me stayed between us unless she chose otherwise. I told her I would not put her in a position she hadn't chosen. She said, I'm not here to protect him. I'm here because what he's doing to you and Clara is wrong, and I cannot keep pretending I don't know that. I picked up the email and folded it carefully and put it in my shirt pocket. I called Rebecca Finch the next morning. She had been referred to me by a longtime customer whose family had been through something similar, and when I laid everything on the conference table in her office on East Broad Street, Chester's financial documentation, Hazel's footage, the forged HELOC application, Naomi's email, she read it all without saying anything for a long time. Then she looked at me and said, Mr. Tully, you have a serious case. She explained what we had in language I could follow. The forged signature on the HELOC was a felony under Ohio law. The movement of funds from Columbus through the Indiana LLC and into the private lender's accounts, using the interstate banking system as part of a scheme to defraud, was wire fraud under federal statute, Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 1343, maximum 20 years per count. And the totality of what had been done to me, a person over 60 years of age, constituted elder financial abuse under Ohio Revised Code, carrying enhanced penalties including mandatory restitution and potential state prison time. She filed for an emergency asset freeze order with the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas that same afternoon. Any transaction involving our property was immediately and indefinitely prohibited. The forged HELOC was flagged for criminal referral. My son received the certified court paperwork the following morning. He called me that afternoon. He said he could explain everything. He said he needed me to listen. I told him to speak with Rebecca, then I hung up. What happened next was my son's idea, technically. He sent a group message to 11 people, family, friends my age, my brother-in-law, 2 neighbors, asking everyone to come to our house on a Saturday afternoon to talk about what he called some important family matters. He framed it as a conversation about Clara and me, about making sure we were properly looked after, about decisions that needed to be made. I confirmed with everyone that yes, we would be home, and yes, they should come. What my son did not know was that Detective Ruiz had spent the 2 weeks since the hospital reviewing Hazel's security footage independently, speaking with Clara directly, and reviewing the attending physician's documentation of her injury. Ruiz had reached the same conclusions the evidence led everyone to who looked at it honestly. He was no longer treating me as a suspect. He was building a case from the same facts Chester and Rebecca had assembled, from a different direction. He and a colleague sat in the back corner of my living room that Saturday looking like any 2 people who had arrived early and found comfortable seats. My son gave his speech. He talked about love and concern, and the hard conversations families have to have as parents grow older. He was composed and warm and very convincing. Some people in the room were nodding. Then Chester stood up and placed a folder on the coffee table. My son's speech changed shape after that. The warmth became urgency, the composure became speed, the careful sentences got shorter and less careful as he realized the room was no longer responding the way he had rehearsed. He looked for faces that were still with him and found fewer with each minute. He used the word protect. He said everything he had done was to protect us. I said, "Sit down, son," and something in my voice made him sit. I went to the shelf and picked up the folder I had placed there before anyone arrived. I set it on the coffee table next to Chester's. I did not raise my voice. I have spent 38 years presenting jobs estimates to homeowners who did not want to hear bad news, and I learned a long time ago that the most effective thing you can do with the truth is present it clearly and let it speak for itself. I laid the footage still from Hazel's camera on the table. Timestamp 8:31 p.m., my son, the bag, the waiting car. I laid the forged HELOC application beside it, the signature in my name on a Thursday when I was 4 counties away. I laid Chester's documentation of the Indiana LLC, the private debt, the transferred funds. Then I reached into the folder and took out the last item, the email to the memory care facility in Dublin. I set it on the table and looked at my wife. Clara had been sitting beside me in silence since the meeting began, her hands folded in her lap, her back straight, her face composed with the specific, deliberate composure of a woman who has been gathering herself for a moment and has decided this is it. She stood up. She lifted the email from the table and read one sentence aloud, clearly, so every person in that room could hear it. Then she set it down. She looked at her son. "You sat at this table," she said. Her voice was level and absolute. "You have sat at this table since you were 6 years old. You handed me documents and explained them to me, and watched me sign my name to them, and I signed because you are my son, and I have trusted you every day of your life." She paused. "I read this email. I know exactly what may initially decline placement means, Lucas. I am 63 years old. I am not confused. I am not fragile. I am not something to be managed." Her chin lifted slightly. "Now get out of my house." My son looked at his mother. He looked at the table. He looked at Ruiz standing up in the corner, badge in hand, and whatever remained of the performance he had been running dissolved all at once, the way a structure collapses not from the outside, but from the moment the thing holding it together finally gives. He was charged that afternoon, wire fraud, forgery, elder financial abuse. 4 months later, in Franklin County Common Pleas Court, my son stood before a judge and entered a guilty plea on all 3 counts. The federal wire fraud charge was resolved concurrently through a coordinated plea agreement. The sentence was 7 years in the Ohio correctional system, mandatory restitution of $175,000, a permanent no-contact order. Naomi filed for divorce the week after sentencing. She had retained her own attorney and was proceeding with care and self-possession. She sent me a handwritten note, a real one on actual stationery, in which she said she was sorry. Not the reflexive sorry of someone managing their exposure, but the specific detailed sorry of someone who has had enough time to understand exactly what they are apologizing for. She said she hoped that in time she might be remembered as someone who did one right thing when it was needed. I showed the note to Clara. Clara read it, folded it carefully, and handed it back to me. She did do one right thing, Clara said. That counts. I put the note in the box of things worth keeping. Drop a comment right now and tell me if you are still with us. Tell me where you are in the world. Every single one matters more than you know. The house on Alton Ridge Drive is still ours. The tomatoes this year were, by general neighborhood consensus, the best Clara has ever grown. Hazel came over twice a week through August to help with the harvest and stayed for coffee both times. Chester comes over on Sunday mornings occasionally when he doesn't have other plans. He drinks 2 cups and rarely stays longer than an hour, and says exactly what he means the entire time he's there, which I have always appreciated about him. I have thought many times about the night my son stood in the center of my living room in front of people he had invited himself, and I have thought about what I felt watching him. I want to be honest about it, because I think honesty is the only thing worth offering at this point in a story. What I felt was not triumph. It was not satisfaction, exactly. It was something older and quieter than either of those things. The particular cold clarity of a man who has been through the worst, and is still standing on the same ground he started from. I love my son. I want to say that plainly, without softening it or surrounding it with qualifications. I love him, and I do not understand how the person I raised became the person who wrote that email and forged my name and loaded a bag out the back door of my house while my wife lay on the floor of my office. I have turned that question over more nights than I can count, and I do not have a complete answer. I may not ever have one. What I have instead is this: 38 years of honest work behind me. A wife who is across the house right now in the kitchen, humming something I can't quite make out. A neighbor who made 4 copies of her security footage and didn't sleep, but stayed busy. A friend who sat at his monitors until midnight because that is simply what he does for people he cares about. A retired attorney who filed an emergency asset freeze order in the same afternoon she received the case and had coffee waiting when we arrived. People who showed up. In 38 years of plumbing work, I learned that a leak will always tell you where it is if you pay attention. The water finds the weakness and marks it. The damage you can see is never the full story. It is only the evidence of a problem that has been building somewhere you haven't looked yet. You have to be willing to open the wall. You have to be willing to find out what's actually there before you can fix it. I found out what was there. It nearly broke everything. And then the people who love me helped me fix it, and the structure held. If there is someone in your life you haven't checked on lately, a parent, a spouse, an older neighbor who lives alone, please don't wait for the call that comes at night when it's already too late to get there in time. The people who would most benefit from hearing your voice are almost always the ones least likely to ask for it. Go to them, make the call, sit down with them and ask how they are really doing. The load-bearing parts of a life are stronger than they look. But they need people around them who are paying attention. God bless every one of you for being here.